This is our second session in terms of this particular grouping of Sefirot. And I'm using the word Sefirot without having yet fully intelligibly explained their nature. And we're going to today use diagrammatic representations to give us a better understanding of what this word really means. So we spoke about anthropomorphisms that we're using the English language, and we're using any language, and language can't begin to depict the ultimate reality. These are only words of analogy and allegory and metaphor and the like. And we discussed the man metaphor and the light metaphor, and we spoke about the way that creation took place from its inception, the way the Kabbalists use metaphoric language to explain the state of nothingness and then a state of somethingness, and what irradiated the hollow of nothingness to create the somethingness, and then how the somethingness became much more dense and coalesced until the point was reached where a finite material world came into being. And in that finite material world, there's differentiation, separation. We live in a world which we call pirud, separation. And separation is not the natural state. That's why when we are in a state of separation, as we discussed, we feel uncomfortable. If it's interpersonal separation, it feels upsetting and lonely. If it's separation from information, we feel frustration that we're not getting it, or something along those lines. So for the idea of connectedness, ultimately oneness, which is what man and woman aspire to with each other, masculinity and femininity coalescing into a state of oneness. And that's the supreme state of oneness that we can achieve, other than the kind of oneness which is a more mystical state of oneness with the all, but that is formulated in different ways. And then we said that through these realms of coalescence flow creative energies, 10 of them. Now, 3 of them we defined as the nature of mind, but because we are materialized mind here, there is non-material mind in the cosmos at large. That's a difficult concept for Western people to understand, that there is a state of intellect that's unembodied. And we're going to discuss today a little bit more about the nature of these various realms. Then there's a state of emotion, and these emotions are made up of 7 other qualities which we call Sefirot, transcending through those realms. And then there's unembodied emotion. So this is really a total system of which we're just touching bits and pieces in the series, only by way of background, because my task in these 3 sessions is to discuss primarily 3 of the 10 Sefirot. It will be 4, I'll explain, and those are the 3 that deal with relationship. So by quick summary, the first 3 Sefirot, Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at, and again I repeat, we haven't yet got a handle on what that word means. The first 3 Sefirot, emanations, creative energy flows, are the ones that make up the nature of mind consciousness in a human being. Chochmah, the way that we draw from the pond of subconsciousness and cross that interface into consciousness, or how a thought pops into your head. Secondly, what do you do with that thought that seemingly pops into your head or that you drew from the subconscious? You then allow it to have some sort of lineal direction. Thought flow, length and breadth and depth and analysis, and then ultimately you are looking for a goal of that thought flow, the focus, and that becomes the sphere of Da'at. Those 3 elements describe the nature of mind consciousness, and we can analyze all our thought processes in context of those 3. That was discussed in a much earlier session by a previous presenter. Then we had a discussion, not us at this table with me, but with another previous presenter, the first 3 Sefirot of emotion. Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet. And we said Chesed is the emotional tendency to flow outward, manifested by giving, sharing, contributing, and the like. Gevura is its equal and opposite, which is withholding, constraint, narrowing, and the like. And Tiferet allows the two to merge into a cogent feeling. So when you have a feeling, that is already the result of this balancing act of this Chesed and Gevura through Tiferet, and now you feel something. Where we're taking off in these sessions is to look at the next three, Netzach, Hod and Yesod. And they're the ones that take the mind and emotion state of affairs and translates them into relationship. In other words, how I then take my mind, consciousness, and emotion state, and I want to share it. I want to enter into relationship. So Netzach is the way that I would then cross the interpersonal boundary, and I have to overcome my separation in order to reach some states of unity. When I open my mouth and speak to you, and you speak back to me, there is already a level of connectedness at speech level, at mind level, and the like. If you use your voice effectively, then your emotions already project through those words and through the consciousness of the mind as such, it's expressed. So these are ways and means of connecting. That's Netzach, is the courage to thrust forward and be victorious. That's what the word Netzach literally means, victory. You're actually being victorious over your own reticence, over your own sense of what is it when I don't have enough willpower to drive me to open my mouth and speak to you. Shyness is an example of a lack of a flow of Netzach sufficiently, and we would then treat shyness by working on Netzach. Hod, on the other hand, means to intentionally and consciously hold back that initial thrust because it may be too strong. You may not be providing enough space for the other person to be able to feel comfortable in your presence. So Netzach is my attempt to relate. Hod is my judgment call, so to speak, to hold back, creating just enough of noise from my mouth and my body that still allows you to do likewise and feel good in my presence. So when people are controlling or dominating, you feel very uncomfortable because they're all Netzach oriented and not practicing any Hod. They're not holding back at all. Then when you have someone who's, is simply a profound thinker in a state of silence, and you can't tell what that person is all about, that person is practicing too much Hod, and therefore there's no sense of some revelation, and it's very difficult to enter into a relationship then also. And then the third one is Yesod. And Yesod is the two functions, the balancing of Netzach and Hod. So I have to thrust out, I also have to hold back, and I find that happy medium, which is right with this person, a different right with this person, propriety in relationships, etc. That's one.
It's a bit like the other two, Gvura and...
Yes, they're very parallel, except these are now relational, the others were internal, within. And then Yesod has another corollary, and that is its functionality in terms of commitment. So, for example, a parent vis-a-vis a child is highly committed, so that when a parent is, for example, helping the child with homework, the parent sometimes gets very, very both agitated on the one hand or excitable on the other hand, and the kid's wondering, why is my parent getting so uptight about these things? It's only a little bit of homework, but the parent has this very strong commitment to see the child succeed, and the child doesn't recognize that because the child doesn't have that maturity to understand what's happening in the parent, but the parent has to be careful because that can put the child off. But nevertheless, it reveals a state of commitment. All relationships that are sustainable will have a high level of mutual commitment, and that also flows from Yesod. And then the final one is so different than the others that we don't even put it as part of a grouping of three. It's the last one called Malchus. And Malchus is a passive state of receiving all these influences of the above 9 Sefirot. It's the end result. It's the final step. At that point, I open my mouth. At that point, I move my feet. It's how we ultimately manifest all these spiritual energy flows through mind and emotion in such a way relationally that I'm actually motivated to move my body. So that's an overall summary. Now, what I would like very much to do is to show you a bit more about the nature of Sefirot, because these are so important elements in analysis of who we are. So if we were to look now at the diagrams, and you'll find that there is a diagram that is basically this page I'm looking at. We've got on both sides of the page. You're right. The first diagram here shows us 4 spheres plus a little one at the top. These spheres, you can either, if you're a science fiction buff, call them parallel worlds, right? And that's probably true. They are absolutely parallel worlds. You can refer to them as different realms, but I'm going to give you a little bit of information about each so you'll be able to distinguish. The one at the bottom, the red one, there's no reason for the particular color coding, by the way. It's just the way that I happen to choose the colors on the run. It's called Asiya. And Asiya is the world of time and space. It's the world of finity. In other words, it's our world. It's where you and I find ourselves. And here we operate in a state of consciousness. This is where our reality lies. The realm of Yetzirah, immediately above it, here in orange, has no time and no space. Already a totally radical difference from the realm of Asiya. Nevertheless, the realm above it, in yellow here, the realm of Bria, makes the one below it in orange, Yetzirah, appear to be, by way of comparison, finite and physical. That's how much different the world of Bria is. And then you have the world of Atzilut above it, which is, again, a quantum leap removed from Bria. Some of the characteristics. I said the lowest one, Asiya, is the world of time and space, the world where things are essentially different materially, particle, people, thoughts. Everything is in a state of singularity and separation. In the world of Yetzirah, the one above it, is where the form of the material starts to become formulated. In other words, it's called the realm of form. It's almost akin to the Greek classical use of the word form also. The world of Bria, on the other hand, is where the beginnings of the creation of anything begins to take place, totally spiritual. And that's why the beginning of the Chumash, the Bible, begins with Bereshit, bara Elokim, bara, the world of Bria. In the world of Bria, creation takes place. Creation doesn't take place in the lower realms, and creation doesn't take place in the upper realms. That's an interesting idea. Bria is the first realm where separation takes place. Separation from what? From the world above it, Atzilut, where everything is still in a state of absolute unity. We're talking about spiritually now. When we talk materially, it's down the bottom. We're talking about spiritually right now, where the beginnings of the spiritual antecedent to what ultimately becomes materiality, but still in a spiritual state. Bria is where separation begins to take place spiritually. In Atzilut, it's all in a state of oneness. But that state of oneness of Atzilut is itself a total removal from the source, the creator of everything, which is that little dot at the top, Ein Sof. And that means literally without end or infinity. So this gives us the cosmic geography. I want to now look at the spiritual dynamics that takes place within this geographical background.
Excuse me. Can someone exist in the same place at all one time?
Who's the someone? Someone can only exist in the lowest realm. But in a moment, I'm going to say you exist in all of them. So stick around.
Okay.
Yeah, the punchline's yet to come. Okay? So, if we look at a second diagram, just below it, you there see, through the same realms, emanations, flows, 10 of them, as you can see. And here we revisit those names which I earlier nominated. Chochmah, Bina, and Das, as you see, are the Sefirot of mind, and the other 7, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, are ultimately the state of emotion. And you and I are discussing primarily the lower 4, more specifically 3 of those 4, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. So each of these flow through, transcend, and are then spiritually refracted through each of these realms. You know, refraction, as you put a straw into a cup of water, right? And you can see that it appears to be bent when it's not bent at all, because the way that the light hits the water creates refraction. Each of these worlds spiritually refract those flows. In Atzilus, there's mind in all of these states, except that you and I can only recognize mind in that lowest one, Asiya. That's you and me. But there are those 3 projections, Chochmah, Bin, Das, throughout all the realms, likewise in each of the emotional Sefirot. Okay? So now what we've done is we've located a little bit of that geography, and now we've located a little bit about the dynamics that takes place within them. Remembering, these diagrams do not describe reality. These are only pedagogical tools that helps us to understand concepts. That's all that the function of these diagrams is. I could have different kind of diagrammatic representations of all the notions that I've been mentioning so far, and that could look radically different. Okay? So now, looking at the next diagram, overleaf, and what you discover suddenly there is that all those 10 radiate through the 4 realms, and this becomes known as your soul. These 10 Sefirot flow individually into each one of us differently. We have variations of the theme in each of these 10. But these 10 are the component parts of what we generically call in English the word soul, or generically in Hebrew would be neshama. That's interesting, because since neshama is your reality, it means, as you see now in that diagram, you exist in each of these realms. I suppose the Western psychological model would postulate that soul flow in the upper 3 realms is called the subconscious. But the word subconscious is merely a word. It doesn't really describe any of the dynamics. Whereas in Hasidus, explaining Kabbalah, we explain the dynamics in each of those realms of supposed subconscious per se. But this is the important point. Each one of us connects up at the top within the Ein Sof, within the essence. Ultimately, we're always in a state of oneness. Consciously, we're not so, because there's like a screening off process that takes place, which is called tzimtzum, so that we live the illusion of separation. And somehow the purpose of life is intimately related to the fact of this illusion. Why do we quest to enter into relationship connectedness? Because we're really at a very profound level trying to become aware of ourselves at the higher level where the essential self doesn't exist, but we're all part of a state of oneness. So there's a natural tendency towards friendship. There's a natural tendency towards connection, a natural tendency towards relationship.
Is Keter this diagram Keter?
Yep, we were not showing Keter here because Keter is a quality that doesn't operate within the body per se. It's like just above the body, and that's why the word Keter, crown. A crown sits on the head, but it's not part of the physical body per se. And here we're talking everything in context of psychology of a human being. So it's important to note that we are all ultimately connected. Now, you experience at times yourself higher up at these levels of your spiritual umbilical cord. Dream state, sleep state is an obvious example. In a sleep state, what happens is your sense of soul connection down at the red realm of Asiya within your body is loosened, and your consciousness moves up, so to speak, along the spiritual umbilical cord. And depending on how superior your soul is or how developed and masterful you have made yourself through accomplishment, is where you may be getting feedback in a dream state. That's one example. Unconsciousness is another example. When a person is unconscious, where are they? I mean, yeah, the physical body's there, but somewhere their soul point of consciousness is well beyond the body. That's why, for example, God forbid someone should be in a coma. We always treat a person in a coma as if they are fully aware of everything going on, because at some level they are. Okay? We had an absolutely wonderful event that took place here at Spiritgrow this past Shabbos. Exactly a year ago, there was a terrible car accident on the highway just outside of Melbourne. Head-on collision. And in one car, a child was killed, and the father was so badly injured that subsequently he spent 3 months in a coma. And they said there was absolutely no chance of surviving. He would be a vegetable and more than likely would simply not be able to live at all. He would die. Miracle against miracle, not only did he maintain, not only did he come out of the coma, but he continued to improve. And a year later, he was here in Shul at Spiritgrow. That's not the end of the story. He came here because he and his wife, that was Yortzeit. That was the 1 year since the child was killed. When the accident took place, another car was passing by, stopped, was the first car on the scene, and called the ambulance and tried to do what they could for the occupants of the car. By pure divine providence, that car driver was also someone associated with us here. Pure coincidence. No such thing as coincidence. They subsequently had never met. But 1 year later, we had on the Shabbos, without each knowing, the opportunity for them to meet. And they met here this past Shabbos, and it was one of the most awesome events you could. Crying left, right, and center, not just them, but everyone there. It was absolutely wondrous. So, why did I enter that discussion? Because coma. You know, we often treat people in a coma, and I see people speaking around them as if no one's there. It's not so. They're very, very much there. And that's Jewish law, that's halacha, that we treat a person in a coma as a fully conscious, sentient individual. So, they're just examples, and then there's the final example, death itself. Death itself does not mean that the soul has stopped existing. All it simply means is that spiritual umbilical cord in this diagram doesn't extend as fully to the body, nowhere near as fully to the body as previously. But there's still an element of the Sefirot connected to the body. And that's why the body exists. Nothing can exist that has shape, size, what have you, unless there is a quality of spiritual generation maintaining the integrity of shape, physicality, thing and being. So there are actually 5 levels of soul, which you can see in this diagram: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and the top one, which is not listed there, Yechida. So that when a person dies, the only level that remains with this body is the Nefesh level. The other levels of consciousness are much more removed as such. So even in death, there remains a connection as such. And then the purpose of the whole exercise. That's the final diagram. Why do we live? Why were we created? So you look at what is the dominant factor that maintains the interest in life. What is the dominant factor that actually creates meaning in life? And that's the exercise of choice, as we've discussed before. We said previously that if you didn't have the capacity to choose, life would be meaningless. We would be robots, automatons, chemicals, just responding on cue. If we didn't have the capacity to, God forbid, do the opposite of what's good, even destroy, even kill, then there would not be the capacity to exercise choice. And ultimately, the Creator exercised choice of creation. And that's the ultimate element that makes us who we are, divine in Hashem's presence. The exercise of choice. How does that operate? When we get to the Nefesh level, the final level of the soul, the level that actually connects to the material world, that level splits into 2. Duality. Duality means things come in 2s. And you've heard me say that also before, that our bodies appear in states of 2s, 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 hemispheres of the brain. Our perception of reality is dimensionally understood in 2s, up, down, left, right, positive, negative, particle, wave, etc., etc. And that is because of our perception of Nefesh splitting into 2. 2, what are they? Nefesh, as you see, Nefesh Bahamit, and Nefesh Elokit, or Nefesh Bahamis, or Nefesh Elokis, in the more colloquial expression. What are they? Nefesh Bahamis is your so-called more natural self, which means ego-centered, food, clothing, shelter, fulfillment, me, I want to be happy, I want to eat, I want to enjoy. That's Nefesh Bahamis. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. It's that part of us that relates to the materiality of life most profoundly. But making us humans that are divine is the other dimension, Nefesh Elokis. Nefesh Elokis means ultimately selflessness, consideration of the other more so than ourselves, and connectedness to the higher spheres of those realms and the Sefirot in those realms. That's what creates choice. At any one moment, my thoughts, my words, and my behaviors are either Nefesh Bahamis oriented, me oriented, ego-centered, or other-centered through Nefesh Elokis. And remembering there is nothing wrong with being, in this respect, me-centered, because if you don't eat, you'll die. And if you die, that's not the purpose of creation. That's not the purpose of your reincarnation. And if you remain unhappy all your life and don't achieve happiness, then the quality of the life that you're given here will obviously be impaired. So there's nothing wrong with questing for myself to become a fulfilled individual or a satisfied individual. But the nature of choice is such that the Nefesh Bahamis knows no bounds. It has no boundaries. So, not only does it want to have a nice home to live in, but it also wants to have a chandelier in every room, including the toilet. In other words, Nefesh Bahamis simply doesn't know when to stop. Acquisition. More. And if a person has $100 million, someone else has 200, and he feels inadequate, or she feels inadequate. And if in a bad situation where a person has $500 million and they only get left with $200 million, they act like little children who've lost everything in life, toys, etc., and feel naked. All right? It's all relative, isn't it? Okay? So, we're not going to complicate it yet. Your point is a valid one, but I don't want to complicate it. I might get there. I just want to keep the duality aspect of it. So what we're saying here is that we have a higher self and a lower self. That lower self that seeks self-aggrandizement knows no bounds, therefore the higher self creates the boundaries for it. That's what wisdom is. That's what maturity is. The child will say, I want more ice cream. The adult will say, you have had enough ice cream. The Nefesh Bahamis wants constantly more ice cream, and the Nefesh Elokis says you've had enough ice cream, but make that a spiritual function. In other words, the wantingness versus the recognition that you don't need all that. And that's why Pirkei Avos says, who is the happy person, or who is the even the rich person? The rich person is the person who's satisfied with his lot. Modesty. Everyone, by the way, has different standards. It's not to say that my modesty has to be your modesty and vice versa. Okay? We have individual standards. God judges us by our individual standards. What might be right for you may not be right for me. It may well be that you should live in a beautiful home with 25 rooms, and I should live in a little hovel that has barely one room. Can't answer that question. But Ezehu ha'ashir, who's the rich person, hasameach bechelkoi, who is satisfied with his lot. So that goes to the issue of fulfillment. So here you see in that last diagram that duality. The ego self, the other-centered self, and this is expressed through all thought, speech, and behavior. So these series of diagrams give us a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about when we speak about our three Sefirot of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. So when I say that tendency of me wanting to enter into your life and opening my mouth and having the courage to speak to you, that's the Netzach thrust. But not wishing to dominate and therefore holding information back. As I think I used the example, the father is a physicist and he wants his 7-year-old son to be a physicist. And by the age of 7, he puts up on the board the whole theory of relativity in all its complexity. Wants very much to give. But of course, the child is completely unimpressed at the end of the day, to the point he doesn't want to consider physics at all. Right? Because there wasn't the Hod practice of holding back just the right information, just the right flow, or feelings, to shower you with just that quantum of feelings or depth of feelings which doesn't frighten you at the same time, doesn't overwhelm you at the same time. Okay? So that's the Netzach Hod, and then of course the Yesod commitment. And the commitment of Yesod is the one that we alluded to earlier and is so terribly important. And that's what is the nature of commitment. And you've heard me say that that the nature of commitment is something that ultimately even transcends mind and emotion. Historically, people have died for their beliefs, and yet it's the most illogical thing to put your life on the line for a concept, for an idea. And yet people have done it. Defies mind, defies emotion. There was such a strong commitment to their belief system that it transcended mind and emotion. And the funnel of Yesod was the one that allowed that to be. So that if I say to you, please give me a glass of water, I'm thirsty, you are committed to me when you give me that glass of water. But if you question whether I should be thirsty or should not be thirsty, then there's a level of commitment that's lacking. Laibl, why do you need a glass of water? You just had one 10 minutes ago. What's that to do with you? I want a glass of water. If you love me, you'll give me the glass of water. If you start questioning me, there's something about the level of connection that isn't there. Or the quality of love is not there, whatever it might be. Someone demands something of another person. Do this for me. And it offends his or her complete perception of reality. What might something... I want you to go and do this for me. But you know, it's not me. I can't do that. I have my own vantage point. You're not giving me the glass of water. You're perfectly reasonable, but you're not giving me my glass of water. You don't love me. You think you love me, but it proves you don't love me. When you love someone, you'll die for them. If you love someone, you'll do whatever they want. It won't be an issue, because the love makes it easy. All right, Narishkeit, they want this, good, I'll give it to them. What's the big deal? It's when the sense of self, the sense of ego, and the me and the I gets in the way, then we are actually finding that the quality of love, the quality of giving, becomes in many ways tarnished. All right.
Can you relate that to like a young child or even older asking lots of questions because they don't?
No, you see, absolutely, your question is perfectly legitimate. The asking of question has to also be understood, because there is asking of a question because of curiosity. There's the asking of a question because of anger. There's the asking of question because showing off. There's the asking a question. In other words, the asking of the question isn't it. It's what is the kavanah within the asking of the question that will determine whether it is genuinity or there's a hidden agenda in the asking of the question. You know, you can sometimes make a very telling point of a put down by asking a question. On the other hand, and what is the giveaway to these things? It's always the tonal quality of the voice. It's also the inflection in the voice. As I said to you previously, as the Rebbe often quoted, Devarim sheyotzim min halev nichnasim el halev, words from the heart enter the heart. Words from the mind, you have to think what's that all about, okay? That's not to say that we don't use mind and heart together. Of course we do. But it's a question of emphasis. When we say words from the heart, it means loving words. A loving question, a genuine question, not a hidden agenda question. So, we've got a discussion of the three Sefirot in terms of relationship. And we now know that Yesod is the final funnel. We need to consider, and I'm only beginning that discussion now, the final Sefirah of Malchus. Literally, Malchus means kingdom. But of course, all these words, victory, splendor, kingdom, are antiquated words that may have meant something to a previous generation, but certainly doesn't mean that much to us. So we're using a much more pragmatic language. What is Malchut? What does a kingdom mean, if we take the antiquated image? A kingdom, for example, if you were walking through a kingdom, let's use the contemporary term, you're walking through the state of Victoria, and you saw road signs. And not only that, you had cautionary notes, beware, curve up ahead, restrict your speed to 40 kilometers an hour, and onwards. You would therefore assume that you're in a particular place of law and order. You would assume, therefore, that there is a source of that law and order. You will assume that there's some legislative process. You'll assume that there must be some source of the authority of the legislative process. In the old world, everything would refer back to the king. So even though the king was invisible, because you never got a chance to see the king was in the palace, nevertheless, the fact there was law and order in the country meant that there was a king. But the king can't operate if there isn't a kingdom. In other words, you can have the Premier of Victoria, but if there's no population of Victoria, it's not going to be much good. So this kind of relationship of authority and subjects is where the notion of Malchut, kingdom, comes into the picture. At a more basic level, it means the state of being. It means the natural product of design. It's the natural product of will and intent. So let me digress momentarily and ask ourselves where the word intention that we use in the word kavanah, what does it really mean? What does kavanah really mean? What does the word intention in English really mean? When you say, I intend to do this, or this was done intentionally, or in law they'll look at a case of murder and ask whether the right, what's called mens rea, state of mind, was there that actually defines that this was a homicidal act culpable as a criminal act of murder, etc. Okay? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? We mean to do it, but what even does the word mean to do it?
It's premeditated. There's been some thought put into it.
Okay.
Decision.
There is, we've used words, thought, meaning, direction, devotion, commitment, and yet there's a wantingness for it. Yes?
So it's a combination of
all of the above? Yes. And yet each one of the above is an intangible. If I were to ask you to define each of the above, we'd have difficulty there also. So Hasidus and Kabbalah gives us a lexicon, a language, an analytical language that actually defines these. So for example, what is at the pinnacle of the chain of motivation? At the pinnacle is something that even a lot of contemporary psychology will also adhere to. At the pinnacle is pleasure. Except that the way we use the word oneg, pleasure, is not the pleasure principle of Western psychology. Because when we say there are levels of pleasure, there's materialistic pleasure, but that can only go so far. The problem with materialistic pleasure is that it becomes an addiction. We're talking about spiritual pleasure, which too can become an addiction if it's governed by self-absorption. But the levels of spiritual pleasure, at least, are much higher in the way that they're experienced. Okay? I don't know if I can, in the course of these sessions, begin to explore what's the nature of spiritual pleasure, but needless to say, physical pleasure is obviously a mirror image of spiritual pleasure. It's still pleasure, no matter what. What might we say is spiritual pleasure? Seeing one's own child be a success story. Although it's finite and physical, it's human related, but there's something more than simply pleasuring my body or pleasuring my mind. It goes something beyond that notion of pleasure. Okay? What other examples of pleasure beyond self-pleasure can you perhaps adduce?
helping someone.
Exactly. In a state of contribution, there's sometimes a really overwhelming experience of of opportunity that you've been able to give of yourself to such an extent, and you can't define that feeling, and it's not even a feeling, because we're going to say this is beyond feeling. It's a state of intense pleasure. Okay? So the word pleasure in English is very limiting. The word oneg in Hebrew has a greater fluency about it because it extends to spiritual pleasure. Now, why did I raise that? Because now I want to get to your point, wantingness. What does it mean to want something? What's wanting mean? Is wanting an end in its own right? Do you want money? Is that the end result? No. Security might be the end result. Or the capacity to give tzedakah might be the end result. The wish for the money, the wantingness, is only a means to a higher end. The higher end is a passive state. It's not really passive, but it's a pleasurable state, passive state. The wantingness is the driver that gets you to the possibility of being able to re-experience that state of oneg over and over again. If you don't have willpower, you're not going to get there. If you don't have the wantingness, you're not going to get there. If you want to be a lawyer and you don't really have the wantingness to be a lawyer, it's unlikely that you'll get there. Same with all things in life. So wantingness, ratzon, is the mechanism, the driver, that gets us to the goal, which is called oneg.
Hanoah, oneg, same thing?
Hanoah is a variation. Hanoah is the self-dimension of pleasure. I get Hanoah. Hanoah isn't out there. It's something that's very more personal in terms of that. Now, earlier than wantingness, how will the wantingness get you there? The wantingness is amorphous. I have a desire. But you must strategize a desire. You've got to give the desire a direction. You know, you say, I want that. It's not enough to want it. A lot of people want a lot of things in life, but other people are successful because they use their heads. They strategize. They provide a sense of direction. So these words they're using before for kavanah, right? That it's, someone said, a sense of direction, okay? But even the cold, calculating mechanism of strategizing, which is head-oriented, is not going to get you anywhere if you don't have feelings to drive it, emotions. Notice that in our system, the idea of wanting and desire is not the same as feelings. We spoke about wanting and desire. Feelings are something else. But if you don't have those emotional attributes, then no matter how good your strategy is, you won't have the fuel that actually projects you there. And then the lowest order aspect of this motivational pyramid is the one that we're just coming to. And that is, you've got to move your feet. You've got to use your hands. You've got to activate. And that's ma'aseh, activity, physicality. And that's because we're at the red realm of Asiya, in a realm of time and space, and we are dynamic creatures, and we have to move. And move is in many, many different ways, of course, not just, movement of the body, but really the whole idea of being able to surf the waves of change that take place in our finite physical world. So, that now sets the stage for us to move into a consideration of Malchus, which we're going to now reserve for our last session, which is self-mastery. How do you utilize the state of being of your physical body in a physical world, in the realm of Asiya, to manifest your reincarnative intent, why you're here? And that requires us to really master the facilities that we've been endowed with. And that becomes the subject matter of our final session in this series.